Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, Professor of Brazilian History and Culture at Brown University and the National Co-Coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. This program is supported by the Washington, Brazil office. This is Brazil Unfiltered. Today, I have the immense pleasure of interviewing Juliana de Moraes Pinheiro, who is the co-founder of the WBO and was the organization's first executive director. With a master's degree in public policy from the Erasmus Mundus program, Juliana specializes in international political economy and governance at the International Institute of Social Studies at Erasmus University Rotterdam in The Hague and the Institut Barcelona de Estudos Internacionais at Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. She has a bachelor's degree in international relations and development from the American University in Washington. She has worked at the Inter-American Development Bank and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights of the Organization of American States, and has collaborated with the Global Alliance for the Green New Deal in Paris and various NGOs in Washington, D.C. Currently, she coordinates the Socio-Environmental Program of the WBO and is the Liaison Outreach Strategy for Parliamentary Observatory on Climate Change and Just Transition at the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Her main skills include research, international advocacy, interparliamentary cooperation, and project coordination and evaluation, focusing on democracy, climate justice, and just transition. Juliana has worked on projects in Brazil, the United States, Haiti, and Mexico. Juliana, welcome to Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you, James. It's a really big pleasure to be here.
So, Juliana, let's just jump right in. We keep hearing that Brazil can be a green economy world leader. Is the country on the right track to claim this position?
That's a very interesting question for us to start. I really do think that Brazil's potential to be the main protagonist in the 21st century is really linked to how it navigates and seeks the political economy opportunities and the difficult challenges of the Anthropocene, right? So essentially, it's how strategically it can position itself in the global fora. So what Brazil has that no other country has, that I will be talking a bit more in detail later, I hope, but the Amazon rainforest is really like the crucial carbon sink in the world. And of course, Brazil has been using that for its advantage, and especially the current government. And like the potential for global ramifications in this era defined by environmental changes. So while there is this immense potential, of course, there's many more things aside the Amazon itself to transition for a green economy. Brazil has all the resources and the biodiversity and all, especially Minister Marina Silva, the Minister of Environment in Brazil, she has said something a couple of years ago that was that Brazil has the tools or the solutions for climate change. It just needs to be used wisely, right? But on like whether or not it's late or is it up to date, I think it's very complex, and we should be discussing this very carefully. So, and on this, I'm curious to see if we have to discuss whether Brazil is late or not for the game. Is it a country that's playing catch up, with other economies, with the European Union, with the US especially, or is it a way that Brazil is really acknowledging its own potential to get into the transition and the green economy game, knowing and taking advantage of its own potential, right? So on the catching up component, comparatively with the normatives put in place and all the implementations put in place for decarbonization and all the energy transitions in the European Union and the US, I would say that progress has been a bit slow in my very superficial perspective. I need to study a bit more to know more in detail. I'm sure that would be debatable, but it's so far been very comprehensively discussed, and the fact that the the ecological transformation plan set forth by Ministério da Fazenda, it's really comprehensive in a way that is present in many other ministries. So I'm very curious to see what's coming up next in terms of implementation of the Fundo do Clima, Climate Fund, aside from the Amazon Fund.
So let's talk a little about that. Could you explain exactly what are the proposals that the Brazilian government is placing on the table now for the international debate? What are the things that it intends to do in the immediate future?
On that point, I would like to talk about the ecological transformation plan, right? I think that is the plan in Brazil, comparatively to the European Fund, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, and so forth. So the ecological transformation plan has 6 main pillars, right? Which is sustainable funding, technological development, bioeconomy, energy transition, circular economy, infrastructure, and adaptation to climate change. And the plan, like I mentioned, is really well positioned in the ministries regarding industrial development, the environment ministry, public management, which Ministério da Gestão, scientific advantages, and all, like many other ministries that are taking care of this plan. And they have 3 main goals, which is looking into higher productivity in green jobs, creation of green jobs, the new relationship with the environment, which it would be like reducing the environmental footprint, looking into green gas emissions, and how energy can be focusing on other sources. And then the third goal, which would be the shared and fair earnings. So really looking into how the transition can promote equitable development with a better income distribution, and widespread benefits. So yeah, there are opportunities and challenges, and I'm honestly a bit curious on the reasons why other countries are not looking to other countries. I guess I would say the United States is not really looking into more concrete actions with some partnerships with Brazil. We see that there is interest. There are many people who come to talk to us at the Washington Brazil office, and there are parliamentarians very interested as well. But I see that it's a key geopolitical strategy that doesn't seem to be very concrete. For instance, the Amazon Fund has grown a lot since Lula took office. Before, as the audience might remember, it was an initiative by Norway and Germany. In 2019, the funds were blocked. 2023, actually, I think even before Lula's inauguration, it was reopened, and many other countries joined. And President Biden pledged $500 million in the course of 5 years. So joining, not only Norway and Germany, but also the UK, Japan, many other countries that have pledged contributions to the Amazon Fund, but so far has only disbursed a bit more than $3 million. So it's been already over a year.
Do you have any understanding or notion about why the Biden administration has not placed more money into the fund at this point?
Yeah, I don't know. I asked this question in a conference last week on the bicentennial relationship between US and Brazil, where organized by the WBO and the George Washington University. And Ambassador Brian Nichols was there, and Ambassador Viotti from Brazil. And I'm curious
Brian Nichols,
to see...
just for our audience, Brian Nichols is the Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemispheric Affairs, that is covering Latin America, Canada, and Mexico in the Caribbean. And so he was there at this event. Excuse me, I just wanted to clarify that for our listeners.
Yeah, well, let me take opportunity here then. And Ambassador Viotti is the first ever female ambassador in the most important embassy of Brazil, right? The Embassy of Brazil in Washington. So I think that's also very important to highlight and clarify. So I took the opportunity that they were both there and some of the climate discussions were on the table to ask, why is it? And the question still remains, I would say. I think based on my experience working with the three different branches of the government in the US, I would say that, the US Congress now being led by more conservative, very conservative Republican parliamentarians, it really is not passing a lot of the things that the White House has been pushing through. So I think that's a first thing that comes to mind. And I really believe that the US loses a lot of its geopolitical potential and this current debate. Of course, like China and Brazil has a whole bilateral fund for infrastructure, which like sustainable infrastructure and so on. And I like many other conservative interests that are, I would say, short-sighted and not really take into account the actual problems of modern era. So yeah, to really wrap this up, the way I see it, it's really the regular forces or the traditional forces that are short-sighted in many places of the world, is not only in the US or in Brazil. They're not really taking into account the actual needs of the current era. And for instance, there are progressive legislators in the United States who have brought to us, to the WBO, to civil society, with a lot of experts on many aspects of Brazil, on why the pledge is not being followed. Why is that there are no more funds being disbursed, or at least not the timeline being followed, right? So they want to question President Biden on this issue. So that's an interesting thing. I think that can be something that could change at some point. But of course, everything depends on the elections. Everything depends on what's going to happen in the United States.
So if we've noticed kind of an interest with Biden and the Amazon, it was part of one of the debates in the last election. I think there's another interesting question to ask, which is the evolution of the Workers' Party in the Lula government, because Marina Silva, who you just recently mentioned, was a minister of the environment in the first Lula government, in the second Lula government, and then left for disagreements about the environmental policies. And President Dilma Rousseff received a lot of criticism for her policies towards Belmonte. So what has changed that the current government is so keen on sending a message that it's very interested in addressing the issues of environmental degradation, deforestation, and promoting a Green New Deal?
I think like to really question the Brazilian model of developmentalism is something that is really complicated to do. And yes, former President Dilma was very criticized for some of the initiatives taken on the development agenda, on infrastructure agenda. But I don't really want to go too much in that, because it is very complex to be addressing. It's very unique, some of the economic models that have been set forth, I mean, since decades ago. But I think what has changed has a lot to do with how the actual strategy of placing Brazil in the global map, right? Like, and a recent report by the World Bank brought some very interesting information on how Brazil has, the cleanest source of energy in the world. So it's really already a strong country to be having more renewable energy, more than already has. So almost half of the energy supply in Brazil, including over 80% of its electricity, already comes from renewables. And on this, I think it's important to really clarify something. Like in the first 2 decades of the 2000s, I would say, this was taken seriously, but I think now it's even more pressing. It's even more urgent. And of course, like between 2014 and 12, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe 2003 and 14, I'm sorry, between 2003 and 2012, deforestation in the Amazon was reduced by 85%. And you just mentioned Minister Marina Silva was pushing this plan, and President Lula at the time was really able to make sure Brazil would have very positive socioeconomic growth while making the environment was, always also responding to expectations. And I at that point, I think it was like, okay, we got here, let's push forward other mega projects. But going back to the renewables, if we compare the energy supply of Brazil with the world, the average between an average is somewhere between 15 and 27% in the main countries of the world, when Brazil is over 80% of electricity comes from renewables. So it's not really expensive for Brazil to expand its renewables. And it would have, of course, like higher upfront costs, as always happens, to have new power generation, more transmissions and storage of energy, but the recovery could be very soon. And considering the global crisis of climate, I think Brazil has seen, like this is an opportunity to set this forward. I hope I'm answering your question. But
yeah. So just to follow up on that, what is the role, do you think, of foreign investment in the development of the green economy in Brazil?
It's a loaded question. I'm going to try to be very brief. It's a very loaded question. So here we need to focus on the energy sector, right? Which is the cornerstone of modern society, the economic systems. But there is a overwhelming reliance on fossil fuels in the world as a major contributor to existential threats of climate change. So it accounts for like 73% of global greenhouse emissions, just the energy sector alone. So remembering here what we're just talking about, the renewables and the potential of Brazil, it's really interesting to see what is the foreign investment interest in it and the opportunities that it seeks. So it's complex to look into transition processes that really goes beyond technological solutions, adopting renewable sources, but it's like the necessity of restructuring of institution policies and norms in a global aspect, not domestically. So foreign investments in that sense can really play a crucial role in development of the green economy in Brazil, because it not only provides capital, but it can, and apparently it's really been coming up with like further technological transfer and knowledge transfer and expertise, something that we didn't really have in the early 90s to catch up where other countries were in that period after 21 years of dictatorship, which of course the spillover effects of that, we're still feeling it now, right? So I really see the foreign investment as a debt that is owed by fully industrialized nations with those trying to catch up, especially Brazil, especially countries that have experienced dictatorships, whereas socioeconomic inequalities rose a lot. So it's really essential to ensure that these foreign investments are really aligned with the sustainable practices to benefit local communities, to respect the rise in traditional knowledge. And I think government the Lula government is really being careful on how to do some of those things. And I can talk more if you want it. But I think most importantly, the foreign investments can allow mechanisms for the country to effectively catch up within the demands of this century, and really like some of the arguments that people say, and not necessarily ideological aligning folks, that, well, this country have deforested, now it's our turn. I think that that argument it's really unfortunate, because it's like where we are today globally is not really the catching up following the same kind of ladder, right? Like we understanding our potentials and our opportunities within the climate crisis, we can really build some new form of debating development, of building what actual development should mean for our country and for the current needs. So talking a little bit, I want to go a little bit more in detail about this because it's very loaded. But talking a little bit about the micro perspective, it's important to look how disproportionate climate change inflicts on marginalized communities and developing economies that are least responsible for emissions, right? Like Brazil. I mean, of course, there are many other countries that are even less responsible. But the core challenges is to really catalyze a way that the transition towards a green economy can be just, can count for climate justice as well. So systematically accounting for mitigation and adaptation for many folks. But from a more macro perspective, I think that some of the degrowth conversations that take place a lot, especially in Europe, are really important, but they can't really be, enforced or debated in the same way, applied the same way in countries like Brazil. And I just want to share very briefly, like there's a study from 2018 that very interestingly, it compares household electricity consumption between France and Brazil. And just like two very straightforward highlights of this study is that the income of the 10 poorest households in France was 10.4 times higher than in Brazil. And then the income of the 10% richest households in France was 2.6 times higher than in Brazil. And if we look, this is electricity consumption, but if we look into clean cooking or, like methods of cooking that are not environmentally challenging, the poorest in Brazil really don't have basic electricity or access to clean energy to cook as much as we would imagine. So 26% of the energy usage in the Brazilian households today are biomass, which, you can associate that to deforestation. You can really look into how that affects gender. If you consider that most people who cook still are females, you can see the transversal aspect of that on health, the impact of that, and also the future generations, right? It's usually children running around and folks cooking with leña, with wood. So it's more than gas. And is less than electric, which is, okay, but it's still 26%. So I think it's interesting to see as well, also because 50% of the energy usage in households in Brazil is for cooking. Of course, cooking is an essential need, but if we go look into the comparisons, micro comparisons between France and Brazil, we would see very different numbers. So it's just like the foreign investment on discussing transition into green economy is not merely looking into a technological overhaul, looking into industrialization levels, but also it's important to see the momentum of social, political, and economic transformation, right? So those that can fully reshape some power dynamics, and here I'm talking about power dynamics domestically and globally, and how Brazil can really assert ownership, and how, actors within Brazil can do that, and how some labor landscapes are really changing. So yeah.
So the Lula government has proposed two standards for export of products. One is the seal, or the seal, the green seal, and the other is the Selo Amazonia, the Amazonia seal. Can you explain what these are about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let me try. So these certificates, right, or certifications, they're really important. They're really used widely in this current era, and they are focusing on ways to really reduce some of the pressures on the environment while pushing forward some of our goods more into a global market. So the Selo Verde aims to identify products that meet environmental and social sustainability criteria. And the Amazonia specifically focuses on products from the Amazon, complying with sustainable practices and the respect with indigenous and traditional communities. And, it's interesting, like, if you are pretty much anywhere in the world today, you can get an acai bowl, right? You can sometimes pay a higher price than you would in Brazil. The quality is not going to be as good because of its mass production and the transfer and everything, but it exists. The problem there is that many folks, let's say in the state of Pará, who have been harvesting acai for generations, now it's more profitable to them to sell acai than for them to consume. So the impacts of looking into the supply chain of acai, the impacts of the local producers is great. It's not great. I mean, it's grand. So I think these certificates can really look into how the supply chains can account for socioeconomic benefits, especially for small producers, but also account for their ability to do that in a sustainable fashion and be able to consume their own good, right? I mean, that's it. I think it's one of the main tasks here. But I'm sure there are so many other facets to the selos, and it's really also, very important thing. I think it's really important to look into the European Mercosur deal that it's still being rewritten pretty much right now, because the way that it was discussed in the previous 1.5, I'm going to say half, during between 2016 and 2022 in Brazil, it was really focusing on neoliberal agendas that wouldn't favor Brazil at all. And now it's being rediscussed. And one of the pressures that were coming from Europe to Brazil was really to impose certain standards that work for Europe. And Brazil would just be delaying even more its potential for green industrialization while supplying materia prima, supplying primary sources to Europe. So now it's we need to see how it's important to look. Not only one area can be doing green industrializing in a green fashion, but the whole world needs to be focusing on that. And I think Lula's government comes to really put some challenges on that respect. And I think both selos can be just, a demonstration of we're doing our due diligence normatively, and expecting to really be where it was before, where Brazil was before, in terms of being the main leader for environmental protection and development.
So the green agenda seems to be something that is susceptible to whoever's in the government. So the Bolsonaro government had a terrible environmental record. So how can we understand this effort vis-a-vis the different political parties that have been in power in recent years in Brazil?
Well, I think it was 2019, the first year that we had record numbers of deforestation, like never seen before, right? This was front page in all newspapers all over the world. And not only the deforestation of the Amazon, but also the other biomes, Cerrado and many other, Mata Atlântica and other biomes that are under threat still. But the main thing was the destruction from within the institutions, right? We had anti-environment ministers, we had anti-democracy leaders. So I think the susceptibility to change in government priorities and policies is really evidenced by the contrasting approaches of the Lula and Bolsonaro administrations. But it's really, also it's important to establish some long-term, consistent strategies that could transcend some political cycles that would, ensure some continuation for success in green economy initiatives. And I think it's worth looking into it more, but I do believe that some initiatives were maintained from a technical standpoint, but a lot of this destruction from within took place. And like I mentioned earlier, the transformation toward green economy is not just about technology. It's really looking into a more social and institutional change, and democratize sectors toward having adequate policies. It really needs to be a state push. And I really do think that President Lula is focusing on that. And we see not only with the former president of Brazil, but we see that happening all over the globe, and especially in the last decade, a tendency to anti-democratic and populist governments to deny scientific knowledge on climate change, right? And the effects of it. So certain groups that have proposed like easy solutions for complex problems, I would say, right? Like it's easy to say that it's easy to, in 2019, let's say, to reproduce narratives that were being pushed forward in the early 70s under the dictatorship. It's easy to say, well, we need to develop whatever that means in their concepts. So we need to deforest the Amazon. We need to push, like how was it in the Vargas era, to push people towards the West. So it's really easy to say the importance of solving poverty in certain areas is by deforesting, but it's not an easy problem. Inequality is not an easy problem. So denying climate change really mean that there's no need for energy transition. There's no need to take like a long-term plan more seriously. So it has been attracting different groups. It has been, from fossil fuel traditional lobby, which I'm sure, pours resources and political agendas in Brazil, but also the ruralista groups, the agribusiness groups, and also the different groups like workers that are afraid of negative impacts of the energy transition in their job, and citizens who might lose their jobs and be impacted by decarbonization processes that may leave them without job and living in scarcity. So I think it's really important, and I really the way I see is like the transformation that is about to, I guess, start being implemented in Brazil, taking some measures to make sure no one is left behind, and no climate denier agenda can be push forward. But
so let's look at that. Let's look at that last question. I mean, what are the ways in which the green economy can deal with social inclusion? As one of the most unequal countries in the world, how can Brazil improve in this area? What are the ways in which it can combine the Lula agenda for social inclusion with the green economy agenda?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if it's undertaken as the way it's being planned right now, with really, I would say, like judicious foresight or with a justice standpoint, and uncompromising commitment to have equitable principles in the transition, it really presents an opportunity to build a better and more just Brazil. But it requires an immense coordination and really courage to reshape some of the very dense structures of the country, right? So I think the stakes right now have never been higher. And like I mentioned, we've had some conversations, and they're really taking into account that this plan is implemented the most democratically way possible. And I really do think that the tools are there for the country to make a new model for, a new economic model. I've listened and read many economists have been discussing on this, and how we, not only in Brazil, but especially in Latin America and other resource-rich countries, the need for a new development model, a need for a new economic model. And I think that a lot of political structures in Brazil, partially conditioned by some foreign interests, but mostly like I mean, the short-sighted visions of the Brazilian elites. Most of the Brazilian elites, I mean, traditional elites, I would say, not some new concepts that we're discussing today, but that are short-sighted, that are only looking for their short-term gains in a time that maybe, there's not going to be a midterm a time where, they're going to be alive. Like, we need to really be looking into the next generation and into the majority of the population. Like, if the country needs to grow, it really needs to take into account its majority. So, and that is Afro descendants, which is the brown and black folks, accounts for 50%, 56% of the country, according to the current census, right? And indigenous knowledge and traditions and culture, and the Quilombola communities. So I think if the actual needs of the majority and the actual needs of the planet, if it's well taken into account, I think that could be a very interesting outcome for Brazil in the geopolitical in a geopolitical aspect. But to really improve the social inclusion in this context of a green economy, Brazil would continue to need to prioritize certain policies for equal opportunities, and on the aspects of not leaving folks behind and technological and knowledge transfer. We can already see a lot of results, like Lula's government, in coordination with governors and mayors, opening a lot of federal institutes, looking into not only technical but also like more traditional education systems, to train folks to maybe they want to go into intellectual career, maybe they want to go into the industries, but really have the account for this inclusion from the education from bottom up, and include those historically marginalized communities in decision-making processes as well. So of course they need to be better educated and well capacitated to be doing the work. Yeah.
So how does the green economy relate to the protection and the interest of the indigenous population? Because some of these indigenous groups have been voicing discontent with the green economy projects as they're not being considered in these negotiations.
Mm. Well, I think the indigenous leaderships have to be not only heard, but really further included into the main decision processes, right? And I think their main dissatisfaction nowadays, especially, last week it was the historical manifestations that take place every month of April. I think it's been for over 20 years now, APL. And when Lula took office and he named then democratically elected Congresswoman Sonia Guajajara to be his minister, the first ever minister for indigenous peoples, he was telling not only the indigenous peoples, he was not telling the Brazilian community, the population, but also the global international community what he was up for, right? So, and one of his main pledges at that point was to demarcate 14 indigenous areas, indigenous territories. We need to remember here how, on that respect, we still need a lot to do to secure the lives of indigenous communities and the right to their territory, which is well beyond, well before the 1500s, let alone this whole conversation about 1988 and Marco Temporal. That's, it's unacceptable that we're having to go through that at the moment in our history. But that pledge of 14 demarcations up until a couple of days ago had only been 8 formally homologadas, right? Like demarcated. And 2 more this week apparently are under the works, but not fully finished. So what we see there is like a year and a half of government and not half of the territories demarcated, half of the pledge already implemented. And the reasons, of course, the indigenous leaders have all the reasons to be demanding their rights to be followed. Especially because those are constitutional rights. But it's complicated. And I'm not defending here, but the Brazilian Congress today, I think we should be heavily talking about this, is more conservative than the Bolsonaro years, right? The bancada ruralista, the agribusiness, has even more numbers and more of a power than they had before. Of course, now the institutions are better positioned, rebuilt, but there are a lot of challenges there. And everybody loses with that, not only the indigenous communities. And everybody loses if we don't account for their ancestral knowledge. And I'm talking here from the perspective of the civil society, representing a lot of folks, but I really have no idea how it would be to be, in the government, having to attend to a lot of a multiplicity of demands that exist in a democracy. But from a geopolitical standpoint, I think really Lula's government needs to be looking more seriously into those demands because it gains with it. We need to be careful also to not only attend to demands, but looking to more of beyond the borders, right? Like how the Amazon is about 63% of the Amazon is in Brazil, but its entirety includes 9 countries. And I'm curious to really kind of look into a bit more how is the coordination actually, not only like in conferences and summits and so forth, but like how is that those presidents, those parliaments of all those 9 countries are articulating together. We see Macron coming to Brazil, spending time in the Amazon, and now, of course, the French Guiana, which is not a between quotes here, sovereign country. And he goes there, gets all the awards and everything, all those discussions, and it's very positive for him. But what is it concretely that is being done? To indigenous peoples that, just to be very clear, the indigenous peoples in Brazil are not only in the Amazon. Of course, we have indigenous territories in Rio Grande do Sul, in Santa Catarina, and of course, all over Brazil. Rio Grande do Sul and Santa Catarina are the southernmost states, and Paraná, southernmost states, predominantly white states, but also there are also indigenous peoples there. So their demands should be heard. The whole carbon markets, the discussion needs to take make actual consultations with indigenous peoples and hear how those new mechanisms could be implemented.
Juliana, we could go on for hours. This is such an important debate, and you've raised some really exciting and interesting questions. There's no easy solutions to the problems that have been articulated today, but I want to thank you so much for spending time with us on Brazil Unfiltered today.
Thank you, Jim.
So I hope you've enjoyed the interview. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.